Hello and welcome to my podcast, A Healer Journey. This is Virginia Kelly. I'm an acupuncturist, psychotherapy, energy healer, and holistic coach. And today they're joining me two lovely ladies, Cathy and Ilana, and they will introduce themselves and tell us what they do. So please, ladies, who wants to go first?
I'd be glad to.
Cathy,
go ahead. All right. My name is Cathy Larson. I live in Southern California. My husband and I are associate pastors at a vineyard church. We've been involved with vineyard churches for about 40 years. One of our primary roles at the church is what we would call prayer counseling, but we use the Immanuel approach in all of our prayer counseling, even with marriage counseling. We came across this about 12 or 13 years ago. We've been using other modalities up to that point. But when we learned about the Immanuel approach, it just felt like a good fit for us. We loved how simple it was. We loved that it was really about putting people's hands into Jesus' hands. He's the ultimate best therapist in the universe, and he knows better than we often what people need. And that's what we love about it. So in a nutshell, that's who I am and what I do here in the context of the church, but a lot of outside of the church too. Ever since Zoom, we have quite a few clients from across the country, even from other nations, that somehow find us and are looking for Immanuel prayer. So that's been exciting and a new chapter in many ways.
Great. And I would like, yes, please, Ilana.
Go ahead.
Hello, Ilana?
Yeah, no, I was saying go ahead.
I was...
and I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, please. I don't know if Zoom is doing the right thing because it should jump screens from people talking to talking. Anyway, I wanted to ask you because I love that you are doing this because as I understand, you're Jewish and yet you're using the Immanuel approach, which is Jesus-based.
The Immanuel approach is Jesus-based and Jesus is Jewish. And that's what's so amazing about it. I guess for years, I really didn't know who Jesus was. I only knew what I was told. And that was based on history of a lot of oppression and using Jesus' name in a way in which Jesus' name was never meant to be used, which was to discriminate or hurt or oppress or, kill and destroy. So those were all things that were, my impression of who Jesus was until I got to have this one-on-one encounter with him. And from that, I was searching for different, I would say therapy or counseling within that realm of the church in some way. And I came across this through Cathy and her husband, Kent. And it's just such a gentle, loving approach that and the effects and the results are really, really phenomenal and transformational. So that's kind of a small piece of my journey into the Immanuel. And I decided not just to get sessions, but also get trained in it so that I could use it when I'm either praying for someone or doing any kind of assistance or counseling or anything like that.
So I don't know much about this approach. I know it's Jesus-based, but what I like about it the most is that it seems to be open to all peoples, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Anybody. You don't have to be a churchgoer or a Christian at all, because we find that, first of all, there's a lot of brokenhearted people in the world. And what I love about the Immanuel approach is how gentle it is. I think, Ilana, you mentioned that there are so many different models out there of what we would call heart healing or inner healing, alongside psychotherapy and all kinds of other ways that people search out healing. We want to stop the pain, right? And so because we're coming from a faith base that Jesus is real and that he's God and that he has healing for us, but it's often not in the way that we're expecting. It's not necessarily a quick fix. What we're finding is that often pain becomes trauma because people feel alone in it. And what our main goal and purpose is not necessarily the alleviation of pain, although that's often a nice side benefit of it. What really happens in Immanuel prayer is that people have an encounter with the living, interactive presence of Jesus. And that alone is very healing because people need to feel seen and heard and understood and validated and mostly loved. And that's what they experience. And as facilitators, we really take a back seat and we act more like coaches, just kind of coaching the person in this encounter with Jesus. But the thing that makes the Immanuel approach unique is that, and this is based on a lot of the brain science from the last 20, 25 years, that our brains actually function better and open up to receive healing when we start in a positive place, a positive connection. So we start every Immanuel approach prayer session with coaching the person to find a positive memory of some kind. If it's a connection with God, that's great, but it doesn't have to be. It can be any moment in your life, a memory from a long time ago, or something that just happened yesterday where when you think about it, you smile. It was a moment of peace or joy with lots of gratitude. And I'll even suggest to people, well, what about, here we live near the beach, what about a walk on the beach at sunset? You know, something that was just beautiful and it just filled your senses. Things like that. And we start there and we deepen a connection with that experience. We literally use all 5 senses. What are you smelling? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you feeling on your skin? And we're just trying to activate that right brain to actually step inside a moment like that. And what that's doing is it's opening the brain, mind, spirit system to receive a healing. And because when you're in pain, of course, you're all shut down. And it's very difficult sometimes. You know, we talk about our pain stories over and over and over. And there is a place for being heard, certainly, and being a place to tell our stories. But what we find is when we start in that positive memory and then we actually invite Jesus there and we coach the recipient to ask him to help them perceive how he was with them. A scripture that came to mind that's interestingly both Old Testament and New Testament is a scripture that says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. I will never leave you and never forsake you." That's both in Joshua 1 and in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament. Both those scriptures are there, and so that we're basing everything we do on that promise that he never leaves and he never forsakes us. So when we get a client into a positive memory and we really help them relive it and re-experience it, and once we sense that connection has been made, then we say, well, just ask Jesus. We believe by faith that he was there with you. Ask him to help you perceive how he was with you there. And people have all kinds of, experiences of Jesus walking on the beach with them, or just a sense of his presence, and it's all good. And then we begin to coach that recipient, the client, to interact with Jesus about just being with them in that moment. And then at some point we segue into asking the question, Jesus, what good plans do you have for my healing today? And when we ask that question, we coach to not edit out anything. So we're just trusting that whatever comes across the person's awareness is where we're going. We're trusting that God's actually leading the session. And so it could be really random. It may not be the presenting issue they came in with. It could be something completely different. But we're trusting that God knows there might be a deeper issue that has, in a sense, ripple effects that will affect many other things in their lives. And so we actually have the client interact with Jesus about whatever comes up. And it's really about facilitating a dialogue between Jesus and the client. And that's what I love about it, because it's surprisingly effective and powerful. And we're our goal is to remove things that are in the way of the person's perception and experience with Jesus, because he's the ultimate healer. So that's what we do. There's a lot, I could tell a lot of stories, but I kind of would love to have Ilana share even some of her own experience, because she's been a recipient. And how has it impacted your life? Maybe, Virginia, you were going to ask her that question already, but I think it might be really helpful.
That anchoring in the very beginning with a positive memory is the very thing that I think sets this apart, because there's a positive. As time goes on and someone's getting sessions, they can now relate back into that or access it when they're not in a session. So when trauma hits, or when they're, faced with something that jars them or is a difficult situation, they can access that memory, and it helps to at least get them grounded and have a little more ease in the situation. The other thing it does is that it starts to get them to focus on some of the positive memories where they could see that, wow, God was really there in that moment when I had this or this happen. It might not have worked out the way I wanted, but this happened or that happened. And so there's a way of putting that together and carrying it into your everyday.
Mm-hmm. So it becomes a lifestyle. That's exactly right.
Correct.
What we find. Plus, let me just add really quickly, one of the other benefits of starting in a positive memory is it begins to build emotional capacity for the client to then go into trauma. Because we all know so often if someone's coming to you for prayer or counseling, it's because they're in pain. And it sometimes throws people off, and we say, well, this is how we're going to do this. We're going to start in a positive memory. And sometimes I've had people feel a little offended by that, but I try to explain the brain science behind it. But what happens is their capacity to stay in the trauma increases and interact with Jesus in the trauma. They actually receive more healing when they start in that positive memory. And there's a lot about the brain chemistry that goes on when we practice gratitude and when we deepen a connection in something positive. So I just needed to add that piece about capacity, because I think it's a big part of all of this.
I wanted to add that you have found a way to bypass resistance.
Yep. That's exactly right. That's another way to say it. Exactly right. Yeah. Because there are a lot of blockages in people, even if they're coming for help. There's still parts of them that really don't want to, or are guarding, the wounded parts of them. And it takes time to build trust, certainly, but to build capacity and to get past that resistance. I agree.
Yeah, 100%.
And it seems also that it assists in building tolerance against frustration.
Well, that's right. If they understand the process, because I find that it's very healing for people to sit in the presence of God, in the presence of love, and just take it in. We do a lot of quieting and breathing and helping the person, calm down and just be present in their body and even with their feelings, because so many of us, right, live detached from ourselves and from our inner life and our feelings, and we just kind of live in a survival mode quite a bit. And so I find that that's a really good step for people, is just to learn to breathe and be still, sit in their positive memory, feel the feelings of that. And the more they do that, it begins to shift their perspective too on their life. Like, oh, I have had some good things happen, and God has given me good gifts along the way. And so that prepares the way for then going to trauma memories and seeing how Jesus can bring healing to that. And it really is a shift of perspective for a lot of people, to find out that they weren't alone in whatever happened, and that Jesus has a different way of looking at things and bringing healing that way. And I'm wondering, Ilana, do you have any particular testimony about how that's happened?
Well, right now, not the first thing I will add, which I think is a really it was important for me, and I want to just guesstimate that it's important for anybody. I think that most of us have this detached relationship with God or Jesus because we sometimes perceive ourselves in the mistakes we've made, or the things that we didn't do right, or the things we did wrong. And we perceive God as this punishing God. We don't see him as the loving father, like this sweet, loving father. And a lot of us didn't have a loving father or mother or parents in general. And I think that what we get to do in sessions with Immanuel is interact and see that when we have that voice inside that starts to want to wag a finger in whatever way, or speak in a way that isn't loving or supportive, it tends to be an echo of something from our past or our own voices, but it's not Abba Father or Jesus. And so what that does is it shifts the dynamic and the relationship to this loving, sweet, gentle father who loves you too much to leave you the way you are, and to give you the things that you probably didn't get from either the outside world or from yourself. And that starts to have a different, effect on you on an emotional level. And so you start to see that those negative things that you allow in are because that's from something else. It's definitely not Jesus or Abba.
No, it seems that it corrects the internalized parental figures, which is one of the many things that we do in therapy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but from such a different place that you wouldn't think to go there unless there was someone who kind of said, hey, this is really the eternal Father and the Father of all, the parent of all parents, right? The healer of all healers. And so it's from such a deep, eternal heavenly realm that it becomes very cellular. And it becomes a cellular healing that is generational. It's not just right now. And I think that that's the really important thing about it.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I find that so many of us have a distorted view of God, and a lot of it's based on the brokenness of our own fathers and their own trauma and, acting out of whatever was not whole in them. And so when God shows up as a true loving father and in a sense is reparenting us, I know for myself, many of my experiences with Immanuel, and of course we're seeing God the Father, Jesus as Immanuel, and Holy Spirit in all as one, is that it surprises me because my internal parent is very condemning and harsh. And
yes,
an intense self-hatred that why can't you get your act together? What's wrong with you? And I'm sure those are kind of parental voices in my head. So when Jesus shows up with tenderness and compassion, even on my worst days, even in my biggest weaknesses, it's surprising, but it is incredibly healing. When someone still wants to be with you and still likes you when you're acting like your worst self, there's a lot of healing that takes place. And I think that's why people go to therapy, right? Because there's a person who can stay non-anxious and just listen. And, and when God comes to you that way and just puts his hand on your shoulder and says, I get it, and I get you, and I've got you, and everything's going to be okay. Those are the kind of things he said to me. And that little girl inside of me goes, really? Is that really true?
Yes.
And over the years, there has been a cumulative effect of that in me, where it's beginning to sink in and changing the way I see myself, the way I act, the way I am with others when I'm not so happy with the way they're being. I can be tender towards them the same. So we're being transformed constantly by the love of God is really where it comes down to. And we're moving things out of the way that keep us from experiencing God like that. And that's a lot of what happens in Immanuel prayer. And there's a lot of other, what I would call inner healing models out there. There's dozens of them actually. And most of them have the same goal. excuse me, of moving whatever's in the way, whether it's unforgiveness or bitterness or resentment or abuse, all the things that come that make us think, well, if you're really a loving God, why did you let this happen to me? Or why didn't you stop that? Or, but you begin to interact with the real God and you find out that that wasn't his intention for you. And he has a good plan for restoring and renewing and healing all of us. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah, I would say that a couple of things are that from that, because there's always that place where everybody says, gee, where was he? How could he let, in my case, I'm a daughter of a Holocaust survivor. So the trauma and generational and cellular trauma that I've carried. And I go, well, where were you, God? And we begin to see that he was there, but he also is loving enough and kind enough that he gave us free will. And there's just, from that free will comes, the evil that men do. From that free will also will come that I want to do things my way and not necessarily surrender to him. So what's so great about this whole process is that Jesus is super playful. And so, he'll remind me of that sometimes I'm in the place I'm in because I made some choices that were probably outside of what he would have wanted or had for me, like some of the opportunities, amazing things that he had for me that I just decided to go this way instead of that way. But what I will say is that from that, what's neat about this technique is that once you start to get this idea of being able to interact with him on that intimate level, you get the opportunity to, when you're not in a session, do that on your own and start to talk to him and have some of that healing as you're just going through life every day, as you get, good at going, oh, Lord, like, what was this? Or what do you have for me here? Don't you see how tough this is for me? Or, and he's always sweet and loving and playful and gentle.
I was gonna mention is when we are at our worst that we need it the most. And the other thing that I want to mention is that I found the divine to have a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's surprising for people, but I think that's exactly right. And that's what we need. We say specifically about Christianity that it's a relationship with God. But I find that many people who've been Christians their whole lives, they believe that, but it's not their experience. And that's what Ilana was just talking about, that our walks with God and in our walk towards healing, we really can have a much more interactive dialogue because his presence is real and it's interactive and he's available and accessible and approachable. And that's, from our perspective, what he accomplished, what Christmas is about, what Easter is about. That's what he did, is he made a way for us to have, like we all have seen little children, they have no hesitation to run to their parent when they want something, even if they're interrupting, right? They don't even hesitate to run to a parent and daddy, mommy, and it may not always be convenient, but God, that's what God did for us. We have that kind of boldness. We can have that kind of boldness, and he is accessible, and we don't have to do the right thing, pray the right thing, it's not about doing more.
It's not conditional.
Knowing more. No, it's a free gift. And that's what's so beautiful about people experiencing Immanuel prayer and the Immanuel approach, is they actually, even people who've been Christians all their lives, it's like, oh, I never experienced this before, that he's this personal and this available and has what I need in the moment. And so that's what we're excited about. We love this whole approach. And again, it's not the only, certainly, we all know that there are many resources for healing, but I find that God brings the right one to us in the right season that we need it. And so it's a privilege for us to be able to offer this to people, and we're all wounded healers ourselves. We're continually receiving prayer ourselves in fact, we don't let people be a facilitator who we're training unless they're also receiving prayer as well. It's just part of our own growth and healing. None of us have arrived in any way or shape or So
I wanted to add one thing, and that is for people who are not believers in Jesus, this modality can fit for them as well. And it's just a matter of tailoring the words that you use. You can just say God instead of Jesus. And for, for people who don't believe in God at all, Cathy, you could weigh in on, using higher power as a result. I don't know necessarily that's.
Well, I have two friends who are licensed therapists who use the Immanuel approach in their therapy. And one of them often will use the phrase, the presence of love. The presence of love. Can you,
okay.
Are you perceiving the presence of love? We've asked for that to come into the room. Are you experiencing that? And so that's one of the ways that, it's just like the 12-step, 12-step system is out there. And who knew that the epidemic of addiction could be an on-ramp for people to God? And even if it is the God of their own understanding, I believe that God is way bigger than we think he is. He's always breaking apart the boxes that we try to put him in. And so I think it's very interesting that is one of the ways that people are finding not only freedom from addiction, but personal growth.
Relationship.
Oh my goodness. And relationship with God. And that's what it ends up being for most people. So
one of the things I wanted to add is me, myself, as a therapist, I am non-secular. I use more of a non-denominational term, more like the divine, and I let people choose what the divine is for them. But I think that a big mishap of psychotherapy in general is the fact that it's being devoid of spirituality. And even Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, he had to be secular in his practice because of the times where he was actually able to make a difference in the field of psychotherapy, where he brought something that up until then it was considered hocus pocus into the scientific field with the libido theory, and it could be measured in the Geiger counter. So I like that you are bridging spirituality with science, because that's kind of been my life's missions. So I'm definitely non-secular. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is why is called the Immanuel approach?
Well, the word Immanuel, as we know, we're probably mostly familiar with it at Christmas time, is one of the names of God. And the name means God with us. And so, Immanuel, Jesus, it's his name. He became the one who came to earth. God became man. We call that the incarnation. And so, unlike many other religions, God actually became a man and identified with everything that we experience and suffer on the earth. And so that's why Immanuel, and it's based on the truth that God is always with us. And he really doesn't ever leave us. And that most people don't know that. We cry out to God, maybe in a moment of need, oh God, help me, but the fact is he really is right there to help us. And that's what the Immanuel approach is, just leading people into in a very sweet and gentle way. And you don't need to go through a big 3-inch training manual to learn it. I was just listening to a podcast recently where in third world people with, some of them with no education can learn this process and lead those in their community through this. And it only takes a day or two to actually learn the process. Now, for those of us that are in the Western world and we can learn it in a weekend, but it takes a lifetime to grow in all the depths and innuendos
Yes.
of where it can go, and some of the more advanced skills of dealing with parts and all kinds of other. I mean, we just get more familiar with trauma and what people are experiencing, and so of course, the more we learn, the more effective we are. But it is a very simple model to learn.
Yeah,
It's
and I find that the more you get out of your own way, which means that you have allowed yourself to be facilitated and receive Immanuel, the more you heal, the more present you are to use this technique when you're facilitating someone else and allow his presence to be what guides.
Ladies, I've been just notified that we have to wrap up, but where do people can find you?
Well, the
Cathy, go ahead.
the easiest way for people to find me is a website called ImmanuelPrayerMinistry.com. And that's Immanuel with an I, ImmanuelPrayerMinistry.com. But to learn more about Immanuel, and there is some on our website, but the Immanuel Approach, ImmanuelApproach.com is the source website for all of this. There's a lot on there about Immanuel, and there are lots and lots of podcasts as well that talk about the Immanuel approach. So I would strongly recommend people do a little searching, and there's just such great information out there and testimonies, people's stories. So we are open to people contacting us and talking more about it, or making appointments for a session. Our sessions are 90 minutes long. So we leave lots of time for just connection. Thank you for asking.
Okay, and to contact me if anybody wants Immanuel prayer, obviously Cathy is all by donation through the website that she mentioned, and anybody who wants to get prayer from me, it's direct to my cell phone number, which is 917-406-1122. And I'm bi-coastal, so I'm in the New York, New Jersey area, as well as Southern California.
Great. I will put both of your contacts in the description. And this seems to be a great system to help people reframe, because so many times we come from a very negative point of view. And when we are helped to see the other side of our stories, that stories we tell ourselves, is very, very helpful. And this was very helpful for the audience. So thank you so much. And I hope we can do this again sometime soon.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. Have blessed holidays.
Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.